Pamela Anderson contracted hepatitis C in the 90s after sharing a tattoo needle with her husband Tommy Lee, who never told her he had the deadly virus. Doctors warned her it could kill her within 10 years, and the virus slowly attacked her liver, while she suffered from chronic fatigue, weakness, and bouts of depression. At her lowest, she described feeling like her body was rotting from the inside, as the disease forced her out of the spotlight and into isolation. For over a decade, she lived with the fear of cancer or liver failure, until she was finally cured in 2015 by a breakthrough antiviral treatment. In 2004, 7-year-old Tyler Moon became a walking miracle after a horrific quad crash left both he and his father critically injured in the Australian bush. Despite suffering 2 collapsed lungs filling with blood, 7 broken ribs, and a shattered arm, the boy staggered for nearly a kilometer through dense forest to reach help. When he finally reached his mother's house, he managed to say, "Dad said you should call an ambulance," before collapsing on the ground. Doctors said it was a miracle that Tyler survived at all, let alone saved someone else's life in the process. In 2000, a love triangle featured on The Jerry Springer Show resulted in a real-life murder just hours after the episode aired. This segment, titled Secret Mistresses Confronted, brought together 42-year-old Ralph Panitz, his new wife Eleanor, and his ex-wife Nancy Panitz in a televised spectacle of screaming and public humiliation. On the night the episode aired, weeks after it was taped, Ralph reportedly watched it while drinking at a bar in Sarasota, growing increasingly enraged as his private shame played out on national television. Apparently fueled by humiliation and fury, he drove to his ex-wife Nancy's home, where she had been granted temporary possession during their divorce, and launched into a violent assault. He beat her so viciously that she was found naked, bloodied, and lifeless on the floor, her body showing signs of a prolonged and violent beating. Ralph was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2002. The case remains a haunting example of how reality TV's thirst for drama can spill into real-life horror. China's developing a humanoid robot that can carry a fetus in an artificial womb, where the baby would float in synthetic fluids, sustained by nutrient tubes and monitored by sensors, before being expelled by hydraulics at birth. The first prototype is planned for 2026, priced around $14,000, and will give people the chance to have children without enduring the risks or pain of pregnancy. Supporters argue it could help women who can't safely carry babies, but critics warn it strips away the human bond of gestation and could mark the beginning of childbirth being outsourced to machines. In 2015, YouTube prankster Sam Pepper lured Sam Goldback into a staged nightmare, faking his kidnapping with Colby Brock in on the plan. Sam was tied to a chair with a hood over his head, then forced to watch as a masked abductor held his best friend Colby at gunpoint before appearing to execute him at point-blank range. Sam's screams and sobs were genuine. He believed he'd just witnessed the murder of his best friend. But just moments later, Colby revealed it was all just an elaborate prank. The video drew massive backlash for its cruelty and for mimicking real-life execution videos, with critics calling it one of the most disturbing stunts in YouTube history. In the 1820s, Surgeon William Beaumont made history by experimenting on a man whose gunshot wound left a permanent hole in his stomach. He tied bits of food to strings, lowered them inside, and then pulled them out to watch them dissolve, sometimes peering directly into the man's gut or draining stomach acid to test it on food outside of his body. These grotesque experiments became the first to prove that digestion was a chemical process driven by gastric juices, making Beaumont both a pioneer of physiology and one of the more unsettling figures in medical history. At age 15, David Bowie was punched in the eye by his best friend during a fight over a girl, causing serious damage to his vision and leaving his pupil permanently dilated. The injury gave him his iconic mismatched stare, but also left him nearly half blind, with blurred vision and terrible depth perception for the rest of his life. In Florida, a rescued otter named Splashed is being trained to sniff out human remains underwater. Unlike cadaver dogs, he can dive into murky waters where bodies are often impossible to find, sometimes because alligators drag corpses away and jam them under logs to hide them for later feeding. Splash can follow the scent through the water and mark the exact location. In 2020, 89-year-old British beekeeper Ron Hoskins lost everything in a suspected arson attack. For 2 decades, he'd been breeding super bees resistant to deadly mites, hoping to save collapsing bee populations worldwide. But vandals suddenly torched his greenhouse and shed, destroying his microscopes, generators, protective suits, and years of meticulous breeding records, while also wrecking dozens of hives containing the very colonies he had developed. Despite a police appeal for witnesses, no suspects were ever found, and in a single night, his life's mission to protect the future of bees was reduced to ashes by perpetrators that remain unknown. In February of 1978, 5 friends from Yuba City, California, all with mild mental disabilities or psychiatric conditions, went to watch a college basketball game in Chico and never returned home. The next day, their Mercury Montego was found abandoned on a remote snowy mountain road in the Plumas National Forest. The car wasn't stuck by any means. It was perfectly drivable, had a quarter tank of gas, and showed no signs of mechanical trouble. The keys were gone, and it was parked as if someone expected to come back. It wasn't until 4 months later when melting snow finally revealed the first few bodies. 3 of the men's corpses were found scattered in the forest, between the car and a Forest Service trailer 19 miles away. Inside that trailer laid the 4th man, Ted Ware, wrapped in sheets and emaciated to just 120 pounds. He had grown a full beard, suggesting he had survived for weeks, but he starved to death, surrounded by enough canned food to last all 5 men more than a year. The food had been untouched except for a few open tins, and the propane tank outside had never been used to heat the trailer. The 5th man, Gary Mathias, was simply gone. Only his tennis shoes were found near Ware's body, implying he had left the trailer completely barefoot in deep snow. No other trace of him has ever been found. Why they abandoned the warm-stocked cabin, why they split up, and why they went up the mountain in the first place, in the opposite direction from home, all remain a mystery. Some believe they were chased, others think they panicked after a wrong turn, and some suspect Mathias' history of schizophrenia may have played a role. But after nearly 50 years, the case still remains unsolved. In 1984, while filming Armor of God in Yugoslavia, Jackie Chan attempted what should have been a routine stunt, jumping from a wall onto a tree branch. But the branch snapped, sending him plummeting headfirst onto a pile of jagged rocks. His skull immediately cracked open, driving bone fragments deep into his brain. Emergency surgery saved his life, but not without leaving a permanent hole in his skull. Now covered by a plastic plate he can still feel to this day. Melissa Nelson worked as a dental assistant in Iowa for over 10 years before being fired. Not for poor performance, but because her boss found her irresistible. He told her that if his pants ever bulged, it was her fault, and claimed that her presence alone threatened his marriage. Despite the clear sexual undertones, Melissa sued him for discrimination and lost. In a shocking 2012 decision, the all-male Iowa Supreme Court ruled that it was legal to fire someone for being too attractive, as long as it wasn't based on gender, but on personal feelings. In August of 2023, Lil Tay's Instagram suddenly announced that she and her brother had died, sparking worldwide shock online. But within a day, she appeared alive, calling the post a cruel hack. Meta confirmed her account had been compromised, but suspicions lingered. Tay publicly accused her estranged father of planting the hoax, while others believe her brother staged it for attention. Then in 2024, she revealed that she'd been diagnosed with an actual life-threatening heart tumor and underwent successful open heart surgery, posting photos from her hospital bed. In 1978, 22-year-old art student Harold Brown fell 324 feet, nearly 30 stories, through the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco after crawling into a ventilation shaft. A guard who witnessed the fall swore he heard Brown yelling "whoopee" on the way down, as if enjoying the plunge. Against all odds, Brown survived the impact on the concrete base with both legs shattered, kneecaps destroyed, and a crushed heel bone, but no internal injuries. Minutes later, he regained consciousness and shocked rescuers by singing Camptown Races as they carried him out. On July 17, 2025, Felix Baumgartner, the daredevil who once broke the sound barrier by jumping from the edge of space, was killed in a tragic paragliding crash in Italy at the age of 56. While piloting a motorized paraglider near a seaside resort, he reportedly may have suffered a cardiac event mid-air, causing the craft to spiral out of control before slamming into the hotel's pool area. The impact killed him instantly and injured a hotel worker with flying debris, sending her to the hospital with neck trauma, but she appears to be okay. Witnesses described a terrifying boom as the glider hit, followed by screams from stunned vacationers. Paramedics arrived quickly but were unable to revive him, and guests at the hotel were left stunned as rescue workers covered his body with a tarp near the wreckage. Hours before the fatal crash, he posted an Instagram story with the caption, "Too much wind," his eerie final message before the legendary thrill-seeker met a brutal end while doing what he loved. Young actor Cameron Boyce tragically died in his sleep on July 6, 2019 at just 20 years old from a seizure caused by epilepsy, a condition he'd been managing with treatment. His death was officially ruled as SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, a little-known fatal complication that occurs without warning, most commonly during sleep. Cameron had reportedly experienced only about 5 seizures throughout his life, all while sleeping, and his family had never even heard of SUDEP until after his sudden death. He was found unresponsive in his North Hollywood home, and there was nothing that paramedics could do once they arrived. Cameron had spent much of his young life fighting for others, raising millions to bring clean water to Africa, supporting homeless shelters, and using his platform to speak out against gun violence. In the wake of the tragedy, his family founded the Cameron Boyce Foundation to raise awareness about epilepsy and SUDEP, hoping to prevent others from suffering the same fate. LeVar Ball, father of NBA stars Lonzo and LaMelo, nearly died in early 2025 after a diabetic infection in his foot spread to his bloodstream. Multiple surgeries followed, first removing toes, then his foot, and finally amputating his leg below the knee along with 4 blood transfusions. At one point, he was in so much pain that he told his doctors to let him die, but his sons pushed him to fight. Now he uses the ordeal to warn others about ignoring symptoms and the dangers of unmanaged diabetes. In 2017, 25-year-old Akbar Salubiro suddenly vanished after harvesting palm oil in a remote Indonesian village. The next day, locals found a 23-foot-long reticulated python nearby with an unnaturally swollen belly. Fearing the worst, they cut the snake open and pulled out Akbar's fully clothed body still intact. Experts believe the snake ambushed him as he was walking home, constricted him to death, and swallowed him whole because he was alone in a forested area where large prey was scarce. It was the first confirmed and fully documented case of a human being swallowed whole by a python, with graphic photos and videos of the recovery sparking worldwide horror. Dan Bilzerian, once dubbed the king of Instagram, built his online image around guns, women, and money, but his real-life track record is much darker. He's been sued for tossing an adult film actress off a roof and shattering her foot, allegedly kicked a woman in the face during a nightclub brawl, and was arrested on bomb-making charges after causing an open fire in Nevada. He also suffered 2 heart attacks before the age of 28, reportedly triggered by a cocktail of drugs including cocaine, ecstasy, and Viagra taken during non-stop parties. In interviews, he's admitted to nearly dying multiple times from drug overdoses and claims his heart had temporarily stopped at least once. He was present during the 2017 Las Vegas mass shooting, where he fled the scene, returned to film bodies, and bizarrely asked police for a gun. On the business front, his company Ignite faced financial scrutiny as he sued his own father over alleged mismanagement tied to a $180 million fraud case. Today, Bilzerian lives in relative obscurity compared to his peak fame, his story now seen by many as proof that money, fame, and indulgence don't always add up to a perfect life. At age 15, actor Chad Michael Murray's intestines twisted around themselves in a rare medical emergency called a volvulus, cutting off blood flow and rupturing vessels. The blockage caused massive internal bleeding, and he collapsed before being rushed to the hospital. Doctors cut him open twice in desperate surgeries, untwisting and repairing his gut while removing damaged sections. He lost half of his blood, drifted in and out of consciousness, and lay so close to death that his family discussed last rites at his bedside. He was quickly hooked up to a critical blood transfusion, saving his life but leaving him with permanent scars and a gut rebuilt from the inside out. These haunting photos from 1960 show Otto Frank, the sole survivor of the secret annex, returning to the attic where his family hid for 2 years during Nazi occupation. In August of 1944, the Gestapo raided the hiding place after reportedly receiving an anonymous tip, though the betrayer was never definitively identified. This 2007 photo captured 8-year-old Christian Golczynski receiving the folded American flag from his father's coffin. Marine Staff Sergeant Mark Golczynski, who was killed by enemy fire in Iraq. The image became one of the war's most haunting symbols of sacrifice, a child forced to accept a flag in place of his father. In 2016, Maze Runner star Dylan O'Brien was nearly killed during a stunt gone horribly wrong. While filming a scene involving 2 moving vehicles, he was violently dragged and run over, suffering a severe concussion, facial fractures, and brain damage. Production was shut down for nearly a year as he battled through physical and psychological recovery. At one point, O'Brien admitted he didn't know if he'd survive, let alone act again, saying he felt like a completely different person following the accident. Jamestown Governor John Ratcliffe, the real-life inspiration for the villain in Disney's Pocahontas, died horrifically in 1609. After being tricked and lured into an ambush by the Powhatan tribe, he was captured alive while most of his men were slaughtered. Colonial reports claimed Powhatan women skinned him alive using sharpened mussel shells, starting with his body and saving his face for last so that he'd remain conscious. They tossed strips of his flesh into a fire as he watched, then tied his fully skinned body to a stake and burned him alive, his screams echoing through the woods as a warning to any other Englishmen who dared to cross the Powhatan. In 2008, 24-year-old real estate agent Lindsay Buziak was lured to a home in British Columbia by a mysterious couple using fake names and a prepaid burner phone. The woman who contacted her spoke with a strange fake-sounding accent and insisted that they were in a rush to buy $1 million home, but said they would only deal with Lindsay even though she was a newer agent. The call made her uneasy, and she confided in friends and family that something felt off. Out of caution, she asked her boyfriend to be nearby during the showing. But as soon as she entered the home with the supposed clients, she was brutally stabbed over 40 times. There were no signs of robbery or sexual assault, and nothing was damaged. Lindsay's boyfriend arrived minutes later and found her dying upstairs, but the killers had vanished. The burner phone used to set up the meeting was deactivated immediately after the murder. Despite public pleas, heavy media coverage, and theories ranging from drug-related retaliation to a personal hit, Lindsay's case still remains unsolved. In 1994, FedEx flight engineer Auburn Calloway boarded Flight 705 with a guitar case. Inside were 2 claw hammers, a spear gun, and a plan to murder the crew. Facing termination for lying about his flight hours, he knew FedEx's life insurance would still pay out if he died in a workplace accident. So his plan was to bludgeon the pilots to death mid-air, crash the plane, and make it look like a mechanical failure, so that his ex-wife and kids could collect the payout. Once airborne, he ambushed the crew, cracking skulls and severing arteries with hammer blows. One pilot lost half his blood, while another had his face crushed and nearly lost an eye as Calloway tried to gouge it out. But bleeding out and barely conscious, the pilots fought back, rolling the plane 140 degrees to disorient him and eventually beating him into submission. When paramedics boarded, they found the rear of the cockpit drenched in blood. Calloway was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and none of the pilots ever flew commercially again. Carlos Haffy Rodriguez was ejected through a windshield in a drug-fueled crash as a teenager, smashing his skull so badly that surgeons had to remove the entire upper half of it, leaving his brain covered only by skin. Incredibly, he survived without any severe cognitive damage, but went on to rack up arrests for drugs, arson, and other crimes, his caved-in head becoming one of the internet's most infamous mugshots. Here's a photo of tobacco company CEOs declaring under oath that nicotine is not addictive. The moment became infamous when internal documents later revealed that tobacco executives had known for decades about nicotine's highly addictive properties and had even manipulated nicotine levels in cigarettes to enhance dependency. In 18th century Europe, the wealthy often devoured sugar with no real dental care, rotting their teeth into black stumps that often fell out. To keep up appearances, they wore dentures, not wooden as legend claims, but often filled with real human teeth. These were bought from the poor, pulled from slaves or prisoners, or scavenged from battlefields, sometimes still bloody from fallen soldiers. With no concept of sterilization, they could carry infections, even syphilis, into the wearer's mouth. In advanced cases, the disease could slowly eat away at the face, collapsing the nose and leaving a grotesque hollow mask where features used to be. Grant Amato, a former nurse from Florida, was sentenced to life in prison in 2019 after murdering his parents and brother when they confronted him about stealing $200,000 of their money to fund his obsession with a Bulgarian cam girl. But even behind bars, his name resurfaced in a twisted new plot. In 2024, Victoria Goodwin, the wife of Ghost Adventures star Aaron Goodwin, fell in love with Amato after watching a documentary about his crimes and began messaging him from prison. But their conversations turned deadly when she confessed that she didn't want a divorce, but instead wanted her husband killed, pooling over $11,000 with Amato to hire a hitman and even sending him details of her husband's routine. The plot collapsed when prison officials intercepted Amato's phone, exposing the conspiracy and leading to Victoria's arrest in March of 2025. In court, Aaron Goodwin faced his wife who tried to have him assassinated, while Victoria, strangely enamored with a family-annihilating simp, was sentenced to several years in prison. Once Hollywood's ultimate action hero, Bruce Willis is now trapped in a devastating real-life decline. In 2022, he was diagnosed with aphasia, a disorder that stripped him of the ability to understand or speak language. And by 2023, his family revealed that it was the early stage of frontotemporal dementia, a rare and brutal brain disease that erodes memory, personality, and communication until the patient no longer recognizes their loved ones. On film sets before his retirement, Willis was already struggling. He needed lines fed through an earpiece, often forgot entire scenes, and at times fired prop guns without warning, all while being pushed into low-budget cameos that cashed in on his fading star power. Now at just 69, the man who once embodied invincibility in Die Hard is slowly being undone by his own brain, unable to even grasp that he was once one of Hollywood's most iconic stars, while his family prepares for the cruel reality of watching one of the most charismatic voices in cinema fall silent forever. In 2009, 25-year-old Matrice Richardson was arrested by Malibu police after failing to pay a dinner bill, then released just after midnight without her phone, wallet, or car. She then wandered into the mountains alone, reportedly in a state of mental distress. 11 months later, her skeletal remains were found in a canyon, her body bizarrely mummified in some areas but missing internal organs, and her clothes were scattered far from her body. Authorities insisted there was no foul play, but the condition of her remains and the decision to release her into the night remained deeply controversial. Rising French child actor and voice dubber Boris Roata was best known as the French voice of Kevin McAllister in Home Alone. But in August of 1994, at just 14 years old, he was struck by a car while cycling in the French Alps and killed instantly, cutting short a promising career that had only just begun. In 1901, outlaw Thomas Blackjack Ketchum was hanged in Clayton, New Mexico, the town's first ever execution. But with no prior experience, they miscalculated the rope length. When the trapdoor dropped, the force was so strong that it ripped his head clean off. His headless body dropped to the ground, and locals, rather unfazed, posed for postcards with the corpse, later turning the images into macabre souvenir postcards. In 2022, Twitch streamer and former adult star Adriana Chechik broke her back after jumping into a deceptively shallow foam pit at TwitchCon. The pit was barely padded over concrete, and she fractured her spine in multiple places. While hospitalized, she discovered that she was pregnant, but the emergency surgery forced her to terminate the pregnancy. Metal rods were implanted as she had to relearn how to walk and was left with lasting nerve damage. The incident sparked outrage as others were also injured, but no real accountability followed. Chechik later said the experience destroyed a part of her life that she'll never get back. In 1996, Polish model and former Miss International Agnieszka Kotlarska narrowly escaped death when she canceled her seat at the last minute on TWA Flight 800, the doomed flight that exploded mid-air, killing all 230 people on board. But just weeks later, fate caught up with her. As she arrived home, a stalker she once knew attacked without warning, stabbing her to death in front of her husband and young daughter. To prove that mosquitoes transmitted yellow fever, American physician Jesse William Lazier deliberately allowed himself to be bitten by an infected mosquito. 17 days later, Lazier died from the very disease he was trying to study. His death confirmed the deadly role of mosquitoes in spreading yellow fever, sacrificing his life to save millions of others.